So I just found out about this final Parsec problem, which is basically we would expect that supermassive black holes eventually combine, right? But we haven't observed this to be the case yet, right? So from my understanding, the current way this goes is that these supermassive black holes come together, right? And then at a certain point they stop and they cannot get any closer to each other, and they kind of get locked at this point here, right? And the only way they can get closer is if there's other stuff that interferes, right? If there's mass in between, or if there's something else that is kind of that kind of introduces itself to this scenario to, disrupt this behavior. And what I think is interesting is that I have made a video talking about how I think that all molecular bonds and like molecules and atoms and stuff are black holes, and molecules are bonded by basically just gravitational attraction, and they're just kind of stuck in gravitational orbits, and that's what's holding them there, right? And so I think this is interesting because I didn't know about this Parsec problem here, right? But apparently that, black holes will get close, but they don't necessarily combine, right? And so because they don't, well, that's okay. Well, now that's a bonded molecule, right? That's a molecule that's been formed there. And so, I mean, I don't know. I think that that's interesting. I think that that's interesting because it's potential evidence towards my theory there being, correct. What is even more interesting is that when you try and do simulations and stuff, basically they're like, yeah, even after the entire age of the universe, they don't really move. And I think that that's kind of interesting because it just really goes to show that, one, honestly, maybe our idea of how old the universe is just completely wrong. And then two, just showing that things on larger scales, time functions differently, right? Because if I'm correct, and that black holes are atoms, basically, and they form molecules, right? And they are bonded by just gravity holding them in place, basically. Then, the scale, when you can observe matter, matter interactions are happen instantly, right? Changes in temperature, if you have just a few atoms, right, and you heat them up, and then you bring in cold atoms, the energy is going to disperse really quickly, if you have an ice cube and you put it on a frying pan, it melts quickly, right? And so it's just really interesting to see how chemical reactions happen really quickly and all these things, right? You have literal explosions because they happen so fast and so much energy is released, right? I just think that that's really interesting because, if my theory is correct, then we're observing these things that it's they stay bonded for the even longer than the universe, which is basically saying okay, yes, they have a stable bond. And then, it's also saying that when we observe these galaxies and stuff, and this energy that's coalescing into these, black holes, and it's just wow, we take millions of years to do a cycle around our galaxy, and at the scale of, if I'm correct, at the scale of these atoms, basically, like, we are an electron flying around so fast that we don't even think that they really even move. They just kind of, you know, are like their motion, like they just jump around, right? They just jump around. They're moving they're moving so fast that we don't think that they're moving, right? They just kind of randomly hop around and, like, you know, appear, right? And so, you know, that could be us. We are moving so fast that, you know, we appear to be not even moving at all, right? We appear to be basically teleporting around. But to us, it's millions of years, right? Hundreds of millions of years. Not even just like millions of years, but like hundreds of millions of years for this motion. So, like, it just goes to show you the time differences in scales, right? And the fact that our quote unquote Big Bang, we think, oh, you know, that happened 13 billion years ago or something like that. And, you know, it initially started with, like, it's such a ridiculously short amount of time for, you know, the initial Big Bang. And it just goes to show that, like, the reason why we have these random points of larger and larger inflation is because you're jumping up levels, I think, right? So, yeah, I don't know. Time is just so crazy. This is like a random theory, but, like, if somehow you could, I'm just throwing this in here because of, for fun. There's no science to this, but I just think that it's interesting. So if you could figure out, right, if my theory is correct, and you could figure out how to basically, like, first even observe that smaller scale, right? If you could even observe that smaller scale, first you got to figure out how to observe that smaller scale, right? Then if you can observe it, then you go, okay, well, let me, like, send something, like, let me, like, try and transmit something down to that level, right? And try and create something at that level, right? And then if I could transpose my consciousness into something like something on that smaller scale, right? Like, for these things that are way down there, you know, like, they're way down there, right? You could transpose your consciousness into this tinier object, right? And then you could live your life, like, live a full life in this tiny consciousness in not even the blink of an eye. And you would effectively have made yourself immortal because you could live infinite lives on this smaller reality, right? And time moves so slowly down there that as long as your consciousness is transferred down there, like, you perceive reality being slower, but it's really not. It's kind of like when you dream, right? You have dreams and, you know, it feels like either time flew by or it just, like, you feel like you were sleeping forever because the dream was so long. Like, you had, like, multiple dreams or whatever, and you feel like you should have more time should have passed than actually did, right? You kind of get this time distortion when you, like, sleep and you have dreams and stuff sometimes. And I think that, like, you know, potentially something like that, like, if, like, I don't know if this is ever actually possible, but if you could do it, it would be interesting because not only would you basically be immortal on that plane of reality, but you would be hands down a god because it's just such a tiny scale that you have. It's an unfathomable amount of energy compared to this thing that you're, like, observing, right? That's insane. I don't know. That's just just some speculation, a random thought, right? But yeah. So that's all I have to say on that one. Peace out.